The year is 2022. A research team drills into the frozen silence of the Siberian tundra, and the drill bit strikes metal. Beneath layers of ice untouched since the Cold War, they uncover a sealed bunker, perfectly preserved, its walls etched with Soviet insignia and faded warning signs. Inside, rows of canisters, film reels, and coded notebooks lie waiting, their labels marked only with one phrase: Operation Winterglass. What began as a geological survey becomes a revelation, the rediscovery of a forgotten chapter in mankind's race for supremacy. As lights flicker across the frozen chamber, history exhales, and the truth, long buried, begins to thaw. Chapter 1: The Siberian Vault of Operation Winterglass. In the closing years of the Second World War, the world was exhausted but restless. Cities lay in ruin, nations were divided, and the great powers were already shifting their gaze from the ashes of Europe toward the next frontier: survival, control, and dominance in an uncertain new age. The Soviets, hardened by loss and driven by suspicion, believed the next war would not be fought with tanks or rifles, but with invisible weapons, ideas, pathogens, and fear itself. Across the icy expanse of Siberia, scientists and engineers were gathered under a veil of absolute secrecy. They called the site K-12, though few knew its purpose. Construction began in late 1946, deep beneath the permafrost near Norilsk, disguised as a mining facility. To the outside world, it was another anonymous Soviet industrial project. Inside, it was something else: a laboratory for the preservation and study of biological agents collected from the remnants of the Second World War. Samples from frozen battlefields, sealed in glass vials and marked with cryptic serial numbers, were shipped by rail in the dead of night. Stalin's regime demanded results. The USSR had learned of Western research through intercepted communications, British testing at Porton Down, American efforts under Operation Whitecoat. In Moscow's eyes, it was proof the Allies were developing their own biological deterrents. K-12 would be the Soviet answer, a safeguard and a weapon all at once. Scientists were ordered to study cryogenic viability, how viral materials might be preserved indefinitely, dormant yet alive, ready to be reactivated when needed. In the towns nearby, miners spoke of strange cargo shipments arriving under armed guard. They saw men in white coats and respirators, never speaking, always watched by soldiers from the Ministry of State Security. The workday sirens rang at irregular hours. At night, the tundra glowed faintly from hidden vents, vapor drifting into the freezing wind. Few questioned it. In Stalin's Russia, curiosity was dangerous. Across the Atlantic, the United States was watching. Newly formed intelligence branches, soon to become the CIA, intercepted scattered reports of Soviet cryogenic containment facilities. Analysts debated their purpose: weapons storage, disease control, or a hoax meant to spread fear. But deep within Langley's archives, one codename surfaced repeatedly in encrypted communiques: Operation Icefall. It appeared the Soviets weren't alone. Both sides were racing not only for nuclear supremacy, but for control over the very building blocks of life. By the mid-1950s, the Cold War had crystallized into paranoia. At K-12, conditions worsened. The facility's director, Dr. Pavel Kozlov, wrote in one surviving letter, "We are freezing history itself, and I no longer know which part of it we are preserving or erasing." Supplies dwindled. Communication with Moscow became sporadic. When a containment breach occurred in 1958, official records fell silent. No reports, no survivors' testimonies, only a final entry stamped in red. Access terminated. Facility sealed. For decades, the site vanished from public record. Maps were redrawn, rail lines dismantled, and even aerial reconnaissance showed nothing but endless white. Those who whispered about K-12 called it the Winterglass Vault, a ghost buried under frost. The Soviet Union fell, governments changed, but the tundra kept its secrets. Only the permafrost, patient and unyielding, remembered what had been hidden beneath its frozen skin. Then came the thaw. Rising temperatures in the 21st century began revealing remnants of a forgotten past. Rusted equipment, abandoned bunkers, fragments of Cold War ambition. When the 2022 expedition team set up camp near Norilsk, they believed they were studying methane releases. Instead, their instruments detected metallic anomalies deep below the ice, arranged too precisely to be natural. Days later, their drill pierced the roof of an underground chamber, releasing air untouched for over 60 years. The lead researcher, Dr. Erik Lehtinen, described the moment in his field report. The wind that rose from that hole wasn't just cold, it carried something older, something that didn't belong to this century. Within hours, their headlamps illuminated corridors carved into the rock, lined with corroded Soviet signage. Authorized personnel only, cryocontainment, danger, biological material. What they found next would challenge everything historians believed about Cold War research. Vials still intact, machines designed for preservation, not destruction. Notes written in a meticulous hand, documenting experiments on viral suspension stability and cross-national sample acquisition. At the bottom of one folder, a single page marked Confidential Joint Initiative Icefall Winterglass bore signatures in both Cyrillic and English. For decades, the story of the Cold War had been one of opposition. Two ideologies locked in perpetual hostility, but the evidence emerging from that vault suggested something far more complex. Cooperation, or at least coordination, conducted in absolute secrecy. It was an alliance not of nations, but of scientists bound by fear. Fear of extinction, fear of falling behind, fear that humanity's next war would not be fought in the open. As the research teams sealed the recovered materials for transport, they couldn't know how many unseen eyes were watching. Intelligence agencies began contacting local authorities within days. Reports vanished from public databases. Lehtinen's team was ordered silent under biological hazard protocol, but some data had already been backed up, shared among colleagues abroad. Fragments of the truth escaped, just enough to raise questions that still have no answers. And so, as the wind howled across the tundra, the past returned. Fragile, frozen, and unforgotten. In the heart of Siberia, a secret meant to die with the Cold War had begun to breathe again. Chapter 2: Shadows Beneath the Bavarian Alps. In 2021, when the Earth shifted beneath the Bavarian Alps, a cascade of soil and rock peeled away the slope near Berchtesgaden, Hitler's former stronghold, revealing a hidden tunnel mouth sealed with iron and concrete. For decades, locals had whispered about secret passages beneath the mountains, built by the Reich to store stolen art or escape routes for high command. But when archaeologists entered that gaping wound in the hillside, what they found was not gold or paintings. It was paper. Thousands of reels of microfilm stacked in watertight crates. Faded metal cabinets bearing the Black Eagle of the Third Reich. Files stamped Morgenröte, Operation Dawn. Historians would later call it the most significant archival discovery since the fall of Berlin. Yet within hours of its unearthing, German federal agents arrived to secure the site. The discovery was declared classified, pending national security review. But rumors spread, as they always do. What was hidden inside those reels? To understand it, we have to go back to the final months of World War II, to a Germany collapsing under the weight of its own delusion. The Allies were closing in, Berlin was burning. But within the secretive halls of the Reich's scientific core, one final project continued. A desperate attempt to harness nuclear energy before their enemies. Operation Morgenröte. According to scattered references found in Allied interrogation reports, the program's objective was twofold: to develop an isotopic charge capable of mass destruction and to ensure its technology survived, regardless of who won the war. In 1945, a small team of physicists and engineers was transferred from Thuringia to an unknown alpine location. Their names later vanished from post-war records, except for one, Dr. Otto Neumann, a theoretical physicist who would mysteriously reappear in 1947 under US protection as part of Operation Paperclip. Declassified American intelligence. Now hints that Neumann's transfer was not an isolated act of recruitment. It was a recovery. US forces may have known about Morgenröte long before the war ended, but what they never found was the archive itself. It had been hidden deep beneath the Bavarian mountains, sealed behind a network of tunnels flooded by retreating SS engineers. For 76 years it lay untouched, until nature itself tore it open. When the 2021 excavation began, Dr. Lena Fischer, a historian from Munich specializing in Nazi-era research, was the first to recognize the significance of the coded documents. She noted that the microfilm contained both technical schematics and detailed correspondence between Reich ministries. including references to isotopic refinement techniques decades ahead of their time. "It's as if," she later wrote, "they were trying to build the bomb, but not the kind we imagined." Fisher's notes describe blueprints for radiological stabilization units, devices intended to contain and repurpose radioactive decay. The terminology suggested not a weapon of destruction, but one of endurance. Energy generation, biological preservation, perhaps even propulsion. In one chilling annotation, a scientist wrote, "Victory will belong to those who can outlast the fallout." But Fisher's research was cut short. Within a week of her findings, federal security officials seized all materials, citing unauthorized access to sensitive data. Her university email account was locked, her field team reassigned, and all digital archives linked to the excavation disappeared from official repositories. Then quietly, Fisher vanished. The police report described her disappearance as a personal matter. No further details were released. Meanwhile, anonymous leaks began circulating among independent journalists. Photos of microfilm labels, partial document scans, coordinates of related storage facilities. One of the reels bore a code resembling those used by early US atomic research sites, NP-1245. Analysts speculated it could link Morgenrötter to the earliest stages of Allied nuclear testing. If true, it would mean that post-war nuclear advancement was not solely a Western triumph, but a shared inheritance drawn from the remnants of Nazi experimentation. The German government's silence only deepened suspicion. Archivists in Berlin quietly confirmed that several public record entries from 1945 to 46 had been removed from national databases, specifically those relating to captured scientific materials. Official statements dismissed the missing files as administrative error, yet internal memos told another story. They spoke of cross-border implications, ongoing classification reviews, and external intelligence consultations. By early 2022, Berchtesgaden was off-limits to the public. The tunnels were resealed, the land marked unstable, and all traces of the discovery buried under legal restraint. Still, fragments persisted, the work of those who refused to let history vanish again. Among them, a recovered field recording from Fisher's team captured her voice echoing through the tunnel. These people weren't just building weapons, they were building a future, one they didn't want anyone else to control. It is that final line that haunts historians most, because the technology described in those archives, if authentic, predates known Western reactor designs by nearly a decade. And if those designs were indeed recovered and re-engineered after the war, then the very foundation of modern energy and defense technology may trace back to those dark halls beneath the Alps. Today, officials insist that nothing extraordinary was found, that the site held nothing but redundant wartime documents. But those who saw the reels know otherwise. They speak of advanced isotope notations, multi-layered encryption, and pages that glow faintly under ultraviolet light. Perhaps from early photographic chemicals, perhaps from something more deliberate. The truth, as always, lies buried. Maybe under bureaucracy, maybe under ice and stone, but every discovery leaves echoes. And in the quiet mountains of Bavaria, where the wind hums through abandoned tunnels and the ground still shifts beneath decades of secrecy, those echoes have begun to stir again. History, it seems, never stays buried for long. Chapter 3: The Baltic Transmission Experiments. In the summer of 2019, a Swedish salvage crew operating in the frigid waters of the Baltic Sea discovered something unexpected. The wreckage of a Soviet reconnaissance aircraft, submerged more than 60 meters below the surface. The jet had no official record, no matching serial number, and no history in military archives. Its fuselage was nearly intact, the Red Star insignia still visible beneath a thin film of algae. Inside, divers found something strange. Not weapons, not documents, but a lead-sealed container marked only with a radiation hazard symbol and the words, in Cyrillic, Ministry of Radio Protection, 1963. When the container was opened weeks later at a classified Swedish defense facility, what emerged was a collection of magnetic reels, a stack of logbooks, and a fragment of a transceiver unit, unlike any known model from that era. The reels were coated in paraffin, preserved against time. Each was labeled Project Aurora. At first, analysts assumed they contained radar data or weather transmissions. But when audio specialists cleaned the tapes and ran the first playback, what they heard changed the tone of the entire investigation. The sound began with static, low, rhythmic pulses, then voices, human voices speaking in measured cadence as if under instruction, phrases repeated, patterns overlapped, tones fluctuated with a precision that felt unnatural. The recordings carried the eerie stillness of laboratory control. Then came a line, repeated over and over in Russian. Response levels optimal. Subject 3 compliant. Forensic linguists traced the dialect to East Germany, early 1960s. What followed were fragments of test reports detailing exposure experiments, human volunteers subjected to sustained low-frequency radio waves. The project's stated goal: to determine the threshold at which transmission influences emotional stability and operational reliability. In simpler terms, mind control through electromagnetic resonance. The Cold War was an age obsessed with invisible warfare. Propaganda, espionage, psychological manipulation, all were tools of control. Yet the Aurora tapes hinted at something deeper, a literal attempt to manipulate the brain through targeted frequencies. A Soviet program designed to create soldiers who could endure fear, exhaustion, and doubt, or perhaps to render enemies pliable before a single shot was fired. Western agencies had long dismissed rumors of such research as paranoia, but now the evidence was undeniable. Declassified US documents revealed that the CIA had run a parallel program, MK-Wave, exploring the same principles of neurological influence via broadcast interference. The existence of both initiatives suggested a silent technological arms race, one not of missiles, but of minds. The recovered Soviet notes, translated and studied by Swedish intelligence historians, referenced test facilities near Riga and Kaliningrad. Disguised as weather monitoring stations, participants were drawn from military training divisions, young, loyal, and replaceable. Exposure cycles lasted hours, sometimes days, and were followed by psychological evaluations marked classified, unstable. One notation, handwritten and smudged by moisture, read simply, "Subject ceased voluntary movement." These experiments unfolded in a world already trembling under fear of nuclear annihilation. Yet what these tapes revealed was a subtler terror, the possibility that the Cold War's greatest weapons were not bombs, but broadcasts. Hidden behind the hum of radio towers, both East and West sought to master the art of invisible persuasion. By late 2019, as the investigation deepened, the Swedish government imposed a total information blackout. The recovered materials were transferred to Stockholm under the pretense of public safety review, but leaks soon surfaced. Partial transcripts, coded signal sequences, and one haunting fragment of an English-language briefing believed to come from an American counterpart. If they can tune the human brain, we lose the concept of choice itself. Former intelligence officers, now retired, began speaking anonymously. One claimed the project continued into the 1980s under different names: Echo Phase, Silent Spectrum, the Baltic Window. He described towers constructed along coastlines, transmitting at frequencies that fluctuated just below civilian radio ranges. You'd never hear it, he said, but you'd feel it. In the fishing villages along the Baltic shore, old residents still recall nights when their radios picked up strange harmonics, mechanical whispers between stations, rhythmic beeps that never repeated the same way twice. Some reported headaches, insomnia, even vivid dreams. The Soviets dismissed these claims as folklore, the byproduct of atmospheric distortion. But now, with the Aurora tapes recovered, those stories no longer seem so easily dismissed. Inside one logbook was an entry from December 1963. Transmission successful, 3 subjects neutralized, cognitive function restored after 67 hours. Recommend replication in field test. The handwriting was neat, clinical, the calm precision of someone recording rainfall, not human endurance. As the Swedish analysts reviewed each reel, they began noticing something else. Embedded within the frequencies were patterns, modulated signals carrying coded data. Cryptographers deciphered fragments of English words. Washington, Phase 2, authorized exchange. It suggested communication or coordination between rival powers. But no one could explain how such transmissions, classified on both sides of the Iron Curtain, had ended up together on a single Soviet aircraft. Then came the final recording, a male voice, older, weary, speaking directly into the microphone. "If this reaches you, stop the tests. The resonance will not fade. It remains in them. It remains in us. After that tape was played, the archive was sealed again. The Swedish government released a single statement acknowledging anomalous electromagnetic research data of historical significance, and nothing more. The original reels were reportedly transferred to a NATO biocommunications facility in Belgium, though their current location remains undisclosed. Independent journalists who pursued the story found themselves stonewalled or discredited. Websites covering the Aurora project were taken offline. One researcher's home was quietly raided under suspicion of data theft. Though no charges were filed, the story receded from headlines, swallowed by bureaucracy and indifference. But the tape still exists somewhere, and so the question lingers. Were the Baltic transmissions an experiment gone too far, or a test that never truly ended? Even now, across those grey northern waters, radio engineers detect faint pulses at the exact frequencies used in the original recordings. Irregular, untraceable, and repeating every 11 days, the world has moved on, or pretended to. But in the static between stations, in the low hum that drifts through the night, the echoes of Project Aurora still whisper. A relic of the Cold War's most dangerous idea, that control doesn't always come from force. Sometimes, it comes from frequency. Chapter 4. The Vanished Files of Operation Seraph. In 2024, a young British researcher named Michael Hargreaves submitted a routine Freedom of Information request to the UK National Archives. He was writing his doctoral thesis on Allied intelligence coordination in the final days of World War II, the chaotic period when armies, fleeing civilians, and secret agencies all collided across collapsing Europe. What he expected was another stack of redacted memos and logistical summaries. What he received instead was a single, misfiled reference, Operation Seraph, Joint MI6 OSS Mission, Prague Sector, April 1945. There was no other mention of it anywhere in the archives. No operational details, no follow-up reports, no debriefings. Just that one reference, buried in a list of disbanded wartime initiatives. Curious, Hargreaves requested the associated files. 3 weeks later, he was invited to view them under supervision at the Q facility. The box contained only 12 documents, all heavily censored, black lines blotting out entire pages. But one phrase, repeated across multiple memos, stood out. Secure personnel before Soviet arrival. The final days of the war in Europe were a race, not for territory, but for knowledge. Both the Western Allies and the Soviets knew that Germany's collapse meant the dispersal of its scientific elite. Physicists, chemists, rocket engineers, and intelligence specialists were as valuable as any battlefield victory. Operation Seraph, as it appeared, was designed to intercept and extract these individuals before Soviet troops reached Prague. But something about the records didn't add up. The documents referenced a full battalion assigned to the mission under joint British and American command. Yet no unit by that designation appears in military rosters. The final field report, dated May 3, 1945, was marked Lost Under Unknown Directives. No casualty list, no return logs, nothing. It was as if the entire unit had vanished. Intrigued, Hargreaves began cross-referencing Allied movement records with Soviet troop advances. He found that a British convoy, codename Seraph Column, was last seen heading northeast through Bohemia, toward the forests south of Plzeň. Soviet forces arrived days later to find the area abandoned, with signs of hasty excavation and recent construction. Locals reported hearing machinery underground, even after the German surrender. Then, suddenly, silence. Satellite imagery, decades later, revealed something curious beneath that same region. An enormous reinforced structure, buried deep below the forest floor. The geometry matched post-war NATO engineering, not wartime German design. Yet construction records for the period were blank. When a Czech archaeological team attempted to excavate in 2003, the government abruptly halted the project, citing unexploded ordnance risk. Privately, the team was told to drop all further inquiry. As Hargreaves pressed further, he began to receive warnings, polite at first, then firm. Requests for information went unanswered. His university's access credentials to defense archives were revoked without explanation. Still, he persisted, and in one forgotten annex of the US National Archives, he found a single line buried in a post-war intelligence summary. Seraph assets transferred to autonomous containment. status classified, autonomous containment. The phrase had appeared before in the language of early nuclear security protocols. It implied not just secrecy, but physical isolation. Whatever Seraph had recovered in 1945 wasn't just personnel. It was something so volatile, so potentially destabilizing, it required permanent burial. Rumors spread among historians and intelligence veterans. Some spoke of stolen reactor cores from German experimental facilities. Others suggested Seraph had uncovered advanced propulsion research, technologies decades ahead of their time. One fringe theory even proposed that Seraph's true mission was to secure a prototype atomic device built independently of the US Manhattan Project, possibly by German scientists operating out of Czechoslovakia. But the few surviving eyewitness accounts paint a stranger, more haunting picture. One Czech villager, interviewed in the 1970s, recalled seeing Allied soldiers escorting metal caskets into the woods under floodlights. They were careful, she said, afraid not of the enemy, of what they carried. She described a distant hum that lingered for days afterward, like the vibration of heavy machinery beneath the earth. When Hargreaves attempted to publish his findings, his draft was flagged for security review and withheld by his university. Weeks later, he disappeared while traveling in Prague. Authorities attributed his absence to personal circumstances, though his hotel room was found undisturbed, passport, laptop, and notes still inside. The official investigation produced no results. The Seraph file was reclassified under the Official Secrets Act shortly thereafter. Still, fragments of the story endure. Among them, a declassified OSS memorandum from May 1946, referencing the silent installation in Czechoslovakia, a subterranean site guarded jointly by Allied and Soviet forces before being permanently sealed. Engineers involved in post-war reconstruction later described reinforced vaults filled with concrete and lead, resembling early containment protocols used in nuclear storage. No official record ties these vaults to Seraph, yet their coordinates align almost perfectly with Hargreaves's research. Even today, the forest remains restricted territory. Satellite maps blur the region. Locals report hearing faint vibrations from below the soil, especially during storms. In the 1990s, a Czech journalist attempting to film there was detained and expelled, his footage confiscated. The government later cited military training grounds, though no active installations exist within 50 kilometers. Operation Seraph remains a ghost in the archives, a name without a mission without a record without a trace. But if the theories hold true, it may represent one of the most significant and dangerous recoveries of the 20th century. A secret buried not for the sake of power, but to keep power from ever surfacing again. Perhaps that's why, nearly 80 years later, the silence persists. Not because the truth is forgotten, but because it was never meant to be remembered. Chapter 5. The Antarctic Memory Tapes. In the southernmost reaches of the world, where the wind never stops and silence feels almost alive, a team of climate researchers made a discovery that would rewrite a forgotten chapter of the Cold War. It was early 2020, the height of an Antarctic summer. The team was drilling through ancient ice near the remains of the old British base E, a weather station long abandoned since the 1970s. Their mission was simple: extract core samples to study carbon levels. But when the drill struck something metallic, the tone of the operation changed. At first, they thought it was debris, an old instrument casing, maybe a fuel drum. Yet as the ice melted away, what emerged was a cylindrical pod, its surface intact despite decades under pressure. Faintly engraved on its side was a marking no one expected to see in Antarctica: the insignia of the United States Air Force. With a date, 1954, the pod was hauled to the surface, thawed carefully and opened under controlled conditions. Inside lay 32 magnetic data tapes, perfectly preserved in sealed mylar pouches. A handwritten inventory was taped to the lid. Operation Deep Echo. No one on the team had heard of it. A quick search of US archives turned up nothing. But when the first tape was digitized, the scientists realized they had stumbled onto something extraordinary and disturbing. The recordings began with routine telemetry, the kind associated with atmospheric research. Then, as the playback continued, voices appeared, clear, deliberate, military. Command exchanges, log entries, and then psychological evaluations. Subject delta exhibiting isolation strain. Recommend further cognitive analysis. Each tape followed the same structure. Environmental readings interspersed with personal logs, as though an entire mission had been recorded over months, yet no such mission was ever known to exist. The deeper they listened, the stranger it became. Transcripts referenced external observation, communication latency, and unregistered personnel. One entry ended abruptly after the line. Transmission interference rising, source unknown. When American officials were notified, recovery protocols were swift. Within a week, US Air Force representatives arrived at the base. The pod, the tapes, and even the digital backups were all taken into custody. Researchers were asked to sign confidentiality agreements citing national security, but one technician, fearing the data would vanish, copied fragments of the audio. Those fragments would later leak to the public, and with them, a glimpse into what Deep Echo may have been. According to the partial transcripts, Operation Deep Echo began in 1955 during a joint US-British initiative to test extreme environment endurance systems. But unlike other polar missions, Deep Echo wasn't about weather or survival. It was psychological. The project tested long-duration isolation using a small crew stationed in a subterranean facility beneath the ice. The objective? To simulate conditions for eventual space habitation. What no one anticipated was the effect such isolation would have on the human mind. The logs describe shifts in behavior, auditory hallucinations, and a growing sense of unreality among the team. One voice, calm but trembling, and states, "We hear signals that aren't ours." Another, days later, says only, "They told us not to answer." It's easy to dismiss such words as products of stress or sensory deprivation, but a second set of logs, recorded by mission controllers thousands of miles away, note anomalies in radio transmissions, distortions that carried patterns too structured to be random. The transcripts were marked classified and signed by a technical officer whose later career was tied to early NASA communications research. When NASA was contacted decades later, they denied any link to Deep Echo. Yet a retired engineer, speaking anonymously, recalled a buried test site used for radio propagation trials in the 1950s. He described early efforts to send high-frequency signals through dense mediums, ice, rock, even planetary soil analogs, to study how information might travel in isolation. "We wanted to know," he said, "if human presence could disrupt the signal or amplify it." The recovered tapes seem to confirm those tests continued for years. One of the final recordings, dated 1958, contains a calm, deliberate voice reading a log entry. Unrecorded personnel observed at outer perimeter. Temperature stable. No visual contact. The voice pauses, then adds, "Transmission ends here." After that, silence. When journalists began investigating in 2021, the US and UK governments issued identical statements. No record of Operation Deep Echo exists. But the recovered technician's audio, though fragmentary, is real. Voice matching software confirmed that at least one of the speakers served in the US Air Force Antarctic program in the 1950s. The mystery of the tapes deepened when satellite imaging revealed faint geometric anomalies under the ice near the old base, symmetrical structures, inconsistent with natural formation. Official reports described them as artifacts of scanning error. Still, the images raised questions. Could there still be an underground installation sealed below the surface, forgotten by history and bureaucracy alike? Scientists who examined the leaked recordings describe a sense of unease that's hard to explain. The background noise, low, resonant, rhythmic, seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. One researcher remarked, "You can almost feel the cold in the sound." Today, the full contents of the Deep Echo tapes remain classified. The official reason is public safety and biohazard precaution, though no biological materials were reported. Some believe the research was psychological. Others think it was communications-based, a precursor to modern deep space telemetry. Whatever the truth, the implications are haunting. If the project truly studied how humans respond to prolonged total isolation, then the voices on those tapes are echoes of minds stretched to their breaking point. Men and women sent to the edge of the world to test the limits of sanity in service of progress. And if, as some suggest, the recordings captured something more, a signal, a phenomenon, or perhaps the first steps toward a new frontier, then that story, 2 lies frozen beneath miles of ice. The Antarctic remains vast, empty and indifferent, a landscape built to bury secrets. The snow falls endlessly, erasing footprints, swallowing time. But sometimes, when the wind shifts across the ice, it carries faint sounds, the creak of old metal, the static of forgotten transmissions, the ghost of a voice calling through the cold. And in that moment, you can almost believe the past is still speaking, if only we could listen long enough to hear what it's trying to say.